Section 3. The Solutions. How to Keep Secrets Safe by Anna Lisinskaya. Zach has decided to try out the online dating service chicksandstuds.com. He signs up for an account at the website and fills in several screens of forms detailing his personal profile and what he's looking for in a potential partner. In no time at all, the service offers him a number of possible soulmates, among them the very exciting-sounding Wendy. He sends her his email address and what he hopes is an engaging opening message. She replies directly to him, and a whirlwind e-romance begins. Poor Zach. Soon he is also getting numerous unsolicited phone calls from political action groups and salespeople who seem to know things about him, and his health insurance company is questioning him about his extreme adventure vacations. The unscrupulous owners of Chicks and Studs have been selling client information. Then there is Ivan, a mischievous coworker to whom Zach foolishly showed one of Wendy's emails. Zach does not know that several subsequent recent messages, supposedly from Wendy, are fakes from Ivan. Alice, in contrast, is on cloud nine, as is her new friend Bob. The two have met through sophisticats.com, a matchmaking service that offers all the latest cryptographic tools. Alice logs on to its website, protected by anonymous authorization, a system that ensures no one at the service can track who she is or when she is accessing the site. Sophisticats employs software that provides secure function evaluation to match her profile and partner criteria with Bob's, so no one at the service knows their information or even that she and Bob have been matched up. Imagine a completely effective dating service that knows practically nothing about its clients. Alice contacted Bob using a feature known as an anonymous channel, and he replied in kind. Not even her internet service provider, ISP, knows that Bob is her contact or what the messages say, and Bob's ISP is no better informed about her. Alice's roommate Eve, however, does know, but only because Alice has talked about Bob and has pinned a printout of some messages above her computer. Eve could be trouble because she is a die-hard practical joker fully capable of tapping into and altering the data flowing to and from Alice's computer. In fact, she controls the network that connects them both to the internet. Never fear, encryption ensures that Eve can learn nothing beyond what Alice has shown her, and the coded digital signatures on Alice's and Bob's emails have made it a cinch for them to spot and ignore Eve's spoof messages. Everything crypto. Like Alice and Zach, most of us conduct many of our daily personal business and government transactions electronically. We do so many things online, from staying in touch with friends to buying and selling everything, including the kitchen sink, that getting comprehensive information about most people is as easy as logging or recording their online activities. And for various reasons, ISPs are already logging our activities, such as which sites we have visited and when. They are not alone. Many entities we interact with online, stores, newspapers, dating sites, and the like, keep close tabs on us as well. Thus, if we value privacy, we face the challenge of how to take advantage of everything the Internet has to offer without giving up our privacy. An amazing discovery of modern cryptography is that virtually any task involving electronic communication can be carried out privately. Many people, including the editors of most dictionaries, mistakenly think that cryptography is synonymous with the study of encryption. But modern cryptography encompasses much more. It provides mathematical methods for protecting communication and computation against all kinds of malicious behavior, that is, tools for protecting our privacy and security. Suppose, for instance, that all the members of a group connected by the Internet want to compute something that depends on data from each of them, data that each wants to remain private. The data could be their vote in an election, and they want to know the outcome without revealing their individual votes. A procedure known as multi-party computation or secure function evaluation, SFE, enables them to tally their votes in such a way that each participant learns the correct output and no one can learn anyone's individual vote, not even a coalition of malevolent insiders capable of intercepting messages on the network and substituting their own carefully crafted fake data. The SFE protocol can also provide each individual with a private output, as done by the fanciful Sophisticat service. The basic idea behind SFE is that each participant's inputs are split into pieces or shares and distributed among the others in the group. Each participant then operates on the shares under his or her control, adding them, redistributing shares of the result, and so on. Finally, the group brings the pieces together again to get the final output. No one ever has the data needed to reconstruct another person's inputs. It may not seem surprising that a function as simple as adding up votes can be evaluated securely, but recall what Sophisticats did for Alice. It worked out which members among its thousands of clients were good matches for her and gave her some limited information about those matches, all without itself learning anything about her profile or anyone else's. A Big Brother organization eavesdropping on the network traffic or combing through the data on Sophisticats' hard drives would be similarly incapable of learning anything. Sophisticats is a fictional service, but cryptography investigators have shown how to turn it into fact. Indeed, this past January, SFE was used for the real-world problem, in Denmark at least, of setting the price for sugar beet contracts to be traded among some 1,200 Danish farmers, based on bids that they inputted privately. Through SFE, we can all have the best of both worlds, the functionality that we want over the Internet without sacrificing privacy. Although the SFE protocol makes possible a wide range of capabilities, its power and generality come at a price. It takes a large amount of computation and communication. The protocol is efficient enough for special tasks, such as elections, yet it is too cumbersome to be pressed into service every time you click on a link to a secure web page. Instead, computer scientists have developed specialized protocols that are much more efficient than SFE for particular common tasks. These include encryption. Neither Alice's ISP nor Eve can decipher the messages Alice sends to Bob. The traffic between Alice's computer and Sophisticats is secure as well. Authentication. Alice can be sure messages come from Bob, not Eve. Anonymous channels. Alice's ISP cannot tell to whom she has sent the messages or that she has ever visited the Sophisticats website. Zero-knowledge proof. Alice can prove to someone else that something is true without revealing what her proof is. Anonymous authorization. Sophisticats knows that she is a member when she accesses its website, but it cannot tell who she is. This protocol is a special case of a zero-knowledge proof. Secret messages. The oldest and one of the most fundamental problems studied in cryptography is that of encryption, the problem of how to communicate securely over an insecure channel, one on which an adversary can eavesdrop. Alice wants to send a message to Bob, but Eve has control over part of the channel, through the apartment's network, that Alice will use. Alice wants Bob, but not Eve, to be able to read the message. In analyzing this problem, notice first that Bob must know something that Eve does not. Otherwise, Eve would be able to do whatever Bob can do. Bob's private knowledge is called his secret key, SK. Second, notice that Alice must know something about Bob's SK so that she can create a ciphertext, an encrypted message, specifically for Bob. If Alice knows the SK itself, the protocol is called secret key encryption, the kind of encryption that has been known and practiced for centuries. In 1976, Whitfield Diffie and Martin E. Hellman, both then at Stanford University, envisioned another possibility, called public key encryption, in which Alice need not know the SK. All she needs is a public value related to the SK called Bob's public key, PK. Alice uses his PK to encrypt her message, and only Bob, with his SK, can decrypt the resulting ciphertext. It does not matter that Eve also knows Bob's PK because she cannot use it to decrypt the ciphertext. Diffie and Hellman proposed the public key idea, but did not know how to carry it out. That came a year later when Ronald L. Rivest, Adi Shamir, and Leonard M. Adelman, all then at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, gave the first construction of a public key cryptosystem, the RSA algorithm. Their algorithm works for a public key encryption because it involves a so-called trapdoor function. Such a function is easy to compute to produce the ciphertext, yet hard to invert to recover the plain text unless a special trapdoor is used. The trapdoor serves as the secret key. The RSA algorithm was the first example of a function with a trapdoor property. For this work, they won the 2002 A.M. Turing Award, the most prestigious prize in computer science. The RSA discovery, hailed as a fundamental cryptographic breakthrough, fueled years of subsequent research in encryption and in cryptography more generally. Much hard work on encryption still remains, from finding new trapdoor functions to studying the mathematical assumptions that underpin the security of a specific function to defining precisely what is required for an encryption system to be considered secure. Public key encryption makes it possible to purchase things online without sending sensitive information such as credit card numbers openly on the Internet. The customer's web browser plays the role of Alice, and the website the role of Bob. More generally, HTTPS, a protocol that most browsers now support, uses public key encryption to provide web browsing over an encrypted channel. Look for https:// in the URL, the address of the website, and an icon such as a closed padlock on the browser status bar. Many people also use public key encryption for secure email. Plenty of free software exists for that purpose, including the GNU Privacy Guard package, available at www.gnupg.org, first released by the Free Software Foundation a decade ago. If you do not encrypt your email, it travels across the Internet in a form that is easy to read and may remain in that form on various hard drives along the way for some time afterward. Hi, it's me. Closely associated with the problem of encryption is that of authentication. Suppose Alice receives the message, "Alice, please send Eve $100. Love, Bob." How does she know that it really came from her boyfriend Bob and was not in fact fabricated by Eve? Just as in the encryption scenario, Bob must know something that Eve does not, so that he, but not Eve, can produce a message that Alice will accept. Thus, Bob again needs a secret key. Moreover, Alice needs to know something about Bob's SK to be able to verify that the message is from Bob. Once again, two varieties of protocol exist. Secret key authentication, more commonly known as a message authentication code, and public key authentication, frequently referred to as a digital signature scheme. Diffie and Hellman first envisioned digital signature schemes at the same time that they proposed public key encryption, and a scheme using the RSA algorithm was the first one constructed. The chief idea is that Bob uses his SK to compute a signature that he appends to his message, and that Alice or anyone else then uses his PK to verify that it matches the message itself. Alice knows the message must be from Bob because no one else has the SK needed to produce the valid signature. Currently, it is easy to trick an email client into thinking that a message came from Bob when in fact it came from Eve. A spoofed email may include fake news reports and incorrect stock quotes, tricking people to act against their best interest. But if all email communication were authenticated, such an attack would be impossible. Your email client would digitally sign all outgoing messages and would verify the digital signatures of all incoming messages. Authentication could also combat spam by having servers reject incoming email that is not authenticated by its sender. Authentication protocols did not exist when email was developed in the 1970s, and many conventions from that era still prevail. Software that everyone can use to sign their email and verify signatures is freely available, for instance, as a part of the GNU Privacy Guard package mentioned earlier. Onion routing. By encrypting your messages, you can prevent ISPs or any other eavesdropper from discovering what you send and receive, but not to whom you are communicating. For example, Alice's ISP will know if she browses an Alcoholics Anonymous website. Imagine if the ISP were to sell this information to car insurance companies. People would be less likely to seek help online because they would be worried that it would increase their insurance premium. This problem could be solved with SFE. Alice's private input would be the URL she wants to look at, and her private output would be the contents of the web page she wants to see. Using SFE, however, would be highly inefficient. In 1981, David Chaum, then at the University of California, Berkeley, proposed a much simpler solution called anonymous channels, now also known as onion routing. As the name suggests, Alice wraps her message in layers. She encrypts each layer and everything inside it with a different person's public key and then adds that person's address to the outside of the layer. A message from Alice to Bob could travel as follows. Alice sends the onion to Mark, who can peel off the outermost layer by decrypting the onion with his secret key. Inside, Mark finds a smaller onion and Lisa's address. He forwards that onion to Lisa, who can decrypt it with her key, and so on. Finally, Bob receives the onion core from someone, and he decrypts it to find Alice's message. In practice, the intermediaries are part of a network of computers set up to handle the decryption and forwarding automatically. Ideally, each intermediary continually receives lots of onions and forwards them in random order. Even if an ISP is watching all the intermediaries at all times, it cannot tell where Alice's message went or where Bob's came from, provided there's enough onion traffic on the network. Bob himself does not know who sent the message unless Alice chooses to reveal her identity in the message. Yet even if she remains anonymous to him, he can still send her an anonymous reply if she includes a reply onion containing the layers of addresses and public keys needed to route a message back to her. Alice's and Bob's messages can remain untraceable even if some of the intermediaries leak information about what they are doing. As more participants use this system and volunteer their computers to serve as intermediaries, it becomes harder to figure out who is talking to whom. As with encryption and digital signatures for email, free software is available for anyone to communicate over anonymous channels or to participate as an intermediary. The Onion Router Tor project, for instance, can be found at www.torproject.org. Private logins. Let's say Alice has a subscription to the online magazine Sophisticat American. She connects to the magazine via an anonymous channel, logs on with her username and password, and takes good care that all her incoming and outgoing messages are encrypted. Does that mean she can rest assured that no one will find out what she is doing online? Of course not. The magazine knows exactly what Alice is doing. Alice might try to cover her tracks by using a pseudonym when she subscribes. But the reading habits of this pseudonymous user may quickly point to Alice's identity. She may reveal her zip code to look at a weather forecast, type in her birth date to check her horoscope, and give away her likely gender by reading about topics such as breast cancer. Those three pieces of information, zip code, date of birth, and gender, are enough to uniquely identify 87% of the U.S. population. Surprisingly, Alice's problem has a cryptographic solution called anonymous authorization. Alice can prove to the magazine that she is a valid subscriber each time she accesses its web page. Yet this proof reveals nothing about which subscriber she is. Not even say that she is the person who accessed it a few hours earlier. The protocol is a special case of the more general zero-knowledge proof protocol. With a zero-knowledge proof, Alice can convince Bob that a statement is true without revealing why it is true or, in fact, without revealing any extra information at all. To prove the statement, I am an authorized user of Sophisticat American, the online magazine, or a third-party service would issue a unique credential, something like a secret key, to Alice when she subscribed. Each time the magazine subsequently challenged her, she would use that key to prove she had a valid credential, without revealing the credential itself. With credentials from various authorities, Alice could provide a zero-knowledge proof of more complicated statements, such as, I am an authorized user and over 18. The basic idea of how a zero-knowledge proof works is illustrated by the scenario described in the box on the opposite page, in which Alice proves to Bob that she has colored a diagram in a special way, technically that she has three-colored a graph, without showing Bob how she colored it. Three-coloring a graph is a so-called NP-complete problem. For the present discussion, what is important about NP-complete is that you can pick any statement for which you have a reasonably short proof and concoct a version of Alice and Bob's game to give a zero-knowledge proof of your statement. The three-colorability protocol demonstrates the principles that make zero-knowledge proofs possible, but it is not very efficient in practice, similar to the way that general secure function evaluation is inefficient. Fortunately, cryptography investigators have developed similar protocols for specific kinds of credentials that can serve for efficient anonymous authorization. Breaking the codes. How secure is secure? When Alice encrypts a message to Bob, just how difficult is it for Eve to decipher the message? And what if Eve has some inside knowledge or opportunities to try to game the system? For instance, she may already know something about the encrypted message, say that it is the name of a local cafe where Alice and Bob are going to meet in person for the first time. Or if Bob is a secure web server, Eve might send it carefully chosen gibberish in place of ciphertext and from its responses learn clues about its secret key. A widely accepted definition of security for public key encryption covers all those bases and requires that Eve gain not even a little usable information. Among others, the GNU Privacy Guard package passes the test. Analyzing the security of a crypto system is a highly developed science. Contrary to the common perception, cryptography is not a cat-and-mouse game in which a system is presumed to be secure merely because no one has shown how to break it. Instead, many building blocks of cryptography rely on well-studied mathematics problems. Cryptographers cannot prove with absolute certainty that such a crypto system is unbreakable, but they do prove that any algorithm to break it would also answer a fundamental question that has stymied the best mathematicians and computer scientists. Some protocols depend only on the existence of a particular kind of mathematical function. For instance, cryptographers know how to construct a public key crypto system out of any trapdoor function. Thus, if someone breaks the functions used in RSA, others that were still standing could be substituted. Only rarely is a scheme assumed secure on a more ad hoc basis. But that is done only after hundreds of leading researchers around the world have studied the algorithm for several years. The cryptography community can only afford to carry out that process for a few critical building blocks. They then prove the security of larger systems, assuming the security of the building blocks. Cryptographic protocols can provide surprisingly versatile solutions to seemingly impossible privacy problems, such as anonymous authorization. But many of the privacy problems we face do not appear cryptographic in nature. If Alice is under constant surveillance in the physical world, it is small consolation that her online activities are secure. In London, cameras already watch public spaces in the interest of law enforcement. Perhaps to protect privacy, building owners could administer the data from cameras on their property, and SFE could manipulate the data to, say, track suspects leaving a crime scene without storing everyone else's activities in a central database. More generally, when privacy is threatened by a system such as public surveillance, we should ask ourselves, what problems is the system trying to solve? And can we keep our privacy by using cryptography in solving them? Originally published, Scientific American 299, Volume 3, 88-95, September 2008. Improving Online Security by John Rennie, et al. Quis custodiet ipsos custodes, worries the classical Roman maxim, who watches the watchman? But the security vendors who stand guard over today's networked information systems are under considerable scrutiny from their competitors, their customers, hackers, and increasingly often, governments concerned about national security. In May 2008, Scientific American's then editor-in-chief, John Rennie, sat down in Palo Alto, California, with representatives from the security industry and from some of the industries that will rely on the protections they provide to discuss the challenges they will confront. What follows is an edited transcript of some highlights of those proceedings. The editors. The participants. Rahul Abhyankar, Senior Director of Product Management, McAfee Avert Labs, McAfee. Whitfield Diffie, Vice President and Fellow, Chief Security Officer, Sun Microsystems. Art Gilliland, Vice President of Product Management, Information Risk and Compliance, Symantec. Patrick Heim, Chief Information Security Officer, Kaiser Permanente. John Landwehr, Director, Security Solutions and Strategy, Adobe Systems. Stephen Lipner, Senior Director of Security Engineering Strategy, Microsoft. Martin Sadler, Director, System Security Lab, HP Labs, Hewlett-Packard. Ryan Sherstovitov, Chief Corporate Evangelist, Panda Security US, Panda Security. Who is responsible? The panelists agreed on certain priorities for maintaining or strengthening data security. Some of these were technological, but regulatory and legal frameworks were also crucial. Diffie. The foremost influence on these things in the next decade is going to be web services and what I call digital outsourcing. We're going into a world where there will be a million computational services that somebody else can do for you better than you can do for yourselves. 10 years from now, you'll look around and see what we call secure computing today will not exist. So what is going to be needed is a legal framework that obliges contractors to protect the security of the information. But they cannot respond to the obligation unless the technical machinery can be developed to allow them to protect that information. Gilliland. Yes, but if you look at how customers are actually implementing technology today, they're already far behind what it can do. That's not necessarily the problem now. It's how do we make this technology practical so that customers can actually address their own privacy issues, their own auditing processes, and manage the protection of their data for themselves to current standards, which for the most part they're not doing today. Lipner. For the business customers, you want the sort of things that Art and Witt are talking about. Assurance about what will be done with your data, ways to describe the restrictions on it, and so on. For the consumers, you want an environment that they trust and that just works, because a lot of the growth of the Internet and Internet business is based on consumer confidence. We need to increase that confidence and ensure that it's justified. Gilliland. The interesting balance that we have to figure out is, how do you enable businesses to continue to share information as rapidly as possible so they can make good decisions and yet make that sharing simple? The dangerous human element. Users themselves can be the Achilles heel of security systems because of their propensities for error and their tendency, however unwittingly, to trade data safety for ease of use. As such, it falls to technology to compensate for the potential failings of users. Heim. We should not underestimate the human element. I liken it to driving. The reason we have controls in place such as driver's licenses is so that people at least have a basic understanding of the rules of the road and how to operate a vehicle safely, so that we can minimize those risks. I don't think there's been enough educational outreach to end users on how to use their systems safely. I'm not necessarily proposing there needs to be a cyber driver's license, but that probably wouldn't be a bad idea because we see that many of the observed problems are behavioral in nature. Diffie. See, that's exactly what would be an utterly monstrous idea. Cyberspace is the world of the future. If you don't have a right to be there, you don't have a free society. Abhyankar. The human element is something that we can't ignore. We recently celebrated the 30th anniversary of spam. Email continues to be something that gets exploited. There's a dark underbelly to technology, and the rate of innovation that the bad guys have and the social engineering techniques they have to steal your data are that much further ahead of what the good guys have. That's something that technology alone is not going to solve. Gilliland. If you look at the research that we've been doing, around 98% of the data loss is through mistakes of human error and process breakdown. Being in the security industry, we're always going to be fighting the bad guys, but the bad guys are less of the problem around data loss. Being able to steal information is always going to be a business for somebody, and you can't ever fight all of them 100%. But we can stop the large percentage that is human in process error. Heim. We see on a day-to-day basis that if the technology organization itself can't anticipate the needs of the individuals, in many cases, they will enable themselves to get their jobs done using consumer-grade technologies. Shistopitov. Right. We can't keep your information secure if you're going to email it to yourself over Gmail so that you can work from home. Heim. Sure, if individuals are not enabled through secure technology, they will compensate using consumer technology such as putting in a wireless access router or copying data to a USB drive. So there are technological challenges, but there are challenges on the economics too. What does it take to do information technology right? To do it securely and in a manner such that people can get their jobs done and they don't have to backdoor the process? Diffie. In short, lack of features is frequently a security problem. If the system doesn't offer you the ability to do what you need to do securely, you will do what you need to do anyway. The economics of modern hacking. Hacking is no longer the province of curious or bored programmers. The production of malicious software is now a business, and that fact profoundly changes the scope of the challenge. Abhyankar. The economic model for hacking is so well established that if it were legitimate and you were a venture capitalist looking to put money into this business, you would get good returns, right? The cost of sending malicious email just keeps getting driven down. and anonymity in the network makes it harder to track down the bad guys from a legal enforcement and prosecution perspective. Shirstobitov. A lot of the activity is not really centered on the original hackers. They're using middlemen. When you actually investigate, you end up getting to individuals, what they call mules, who had no awareness or knowledge that they were becoming victims of this whole scheme. We're seeing that result as an upsurge from these websites that say, I have a great job for you, make $1,000 a week. Law enforcement can't get to the hacker who created the malicious software. The hacker or the attacker is long gone. The hackers don't actually conduct the attacks. They sell these creations for money. There's an underground economy just on sales of these attacks. You can now purchase something for $1,200 and be a cyber criminal. Sadler. So given that we all understand how sophisticated the bad guys have become, what level of cooperation do you think we should be employing? Because essentially, we still all compete. We're fragmented, and the bad guys are coordinated. And there's plenty of evidence that these different organized criminal elements are actually trading this stuff among themselves. We don't have that level of cooperation among ourselves. Shirstobitov. That's why I would advocate a vendor-agnostic approach here. To circumvent this threat takes not only a technological approach, but also a community-sharing response, with research labs working together to share what they've seen. Because already, not all the malware samples in our labs come from our customers. We do get them from others in the industry. At the top, we're not like bitter rivals. It's a common problem that the industry as a whole needs to respond to. Better education or better design? Perhaps surprisingly, the panelists generally foresaw few lasting improvements in data security from better educating end users. The nature of the threats changes too fast. Lipner. We need to take the burden of sophisticated education off the end user and get to the point where the technology is just helping the user be secure, and you're not imposing pop-up fatigue on users because it's counterproductive. A lot of building secure systems is about the user experience, and I think that's gotten short shrift across the industry. Sadler. I don't think we should be putting emphasis on education at all. I think it's only education in extremely general terms that will last more than 6 months. You look at many of the education programs around the globe, and they're very, very short-term in what they're telling people to do. Put in place the latest antivirus, that sort of thing. Heim. If people really knew the consequences of installing that free animated screensaver widget, that, in essence, they're saying, I trust the developer of this little widget with complete access to my system and all my data. It might change the way people behave online. Sadler. I think there is an answer, though. You train young children, when they go out, to pay attention to the neighborhoods. These neighborhoods are kind of safe, these are not. The equivalent on the internet now is, we walk out with our entire bank account into the most unsafe neighborhoods, and then we're surprised when we're mugged. There has to be a separation of concerns. You want people to be able to download the latest screensavers, but in a part of their environment that doesn't affect their bank account. Heim. But when we're dealing with large-scale infrastructures, you need to be able to rapidly apply new patches and to maintain the stability of your environment. And it's not always clear-cut that if you apply a security patch, that you aren't going to come crashing down. Gilliland. I agree, there shouldn't be some driver's license-like certificate for using the internet. But why wouldn't we have basic end-user education when you walk into a company? Here's your laptop, here's your PDA. I'm going to teach you the security principles for Symantec. Sadler. And how long do you think those principles would last? Gilliland. Principles can last for a long time. Diffie. It depends on what they are. Gilliland. Don't open email or don't open attachments from people that you don't know. Diffie. That's a hopeless rule. Lipner. The only way you can address that is with underlying security and authentication. You give users a choice, but they have to know they are classes of things that are safe, whether it's websites or attachments or executables. If you tell a user you have to read the code or you have to interpret the SSL dialog boxes, that's too hard. For end users, you have to provide an authenticated infrastructure that allows them to know whom they're dealing with. Gilliland. End users will violate the trust given the opportunity without a certain amount of education. Even if a warning pops up and says, warning, this site appears to be dangerous, but the site says, Click here to see Britney Spears naked. They will still do it. The most effective sort of virus dissemination is always social engineering, always. Landwehr, isn't there another way we can look at solving this? Instead of focusing so much on how to educate users about malware, we can change the rules of the game for the hackers so they're less interested in attacking our computers because we're better at protecting the information that's on them. Then if anybody steals the files that are on the disk, they're encrypted. If someone accidentally emails something, it's encrypted. If it goes any place that it shouldn't, they don't have the keys to open it. Shirstavitov, agreed. In the financial community, they're taking on the evolution of out-of-band authentication, joint authentication over two independent systems, such as a networked computer and a cell phone. Some of the higher rolling traders are getting authentication devices, smart keys, RSA tokens. Some in the financial community are also putting anomaly detection in the back ends to detect suspicious patterns and localizations. Ultimately, financial institutions are adapting their technologies and authentication mechanisms so that they basically do not invite hackers. Landwehr, we're seeing a lot of activity around smart cards. I've got my smart card badge here, and it's the same badge that I use to go into the buildings that we have around the world. But it also has a PKI, public key infrastructure credential on it that I can use to log on to applications, encrypt business documents, and digitally sign PDF forms. There's also a PIN code that protects it, just like an ATM card. If you steal the card from me, you get a couple of guesses on the PIN code, and then it stops working. The international perspective. National perspectives on data security and privacy vary greatly. In many respects, the U.S. is lagging in its response to rising threats. Sadler, I think there's a much greater effort in France, Germany, and the UK to educate small businesses than in the U.S. So despite my arguing against education, I think the U.S. probably has to get some basics in place for small businesses here. Also, there's a much better dialogue among academia, government agencies, and industry in Europe, particularly in the UK and in Germany, than in the U.S. I don't think the U.S. shows anything like enough common dialogue among those parties. Shirstavitov, we're seeing task forces emerge in Europe that are dedicated to thwarting cybercrime. They're taking an initiative far in advance. But from our talks with the FBI, it is still not there yet in this country. Lipner, because there are usages and national purposes specific to Europe and the U.S. government, additional standards will be needed. I think they'll have to be international. Gilliland, obviously there's a ton of different privacy regulations that go on throughout Europe. Companies are trying to figure out how to adhere to some process or some policy framework that allows them to follow as many of the rules as they can. That's the challenge that we haven't spent a lot of time talking about here. How do people and companies that have been trying to comply with the privacy regulations prove that they have been doing it? Originally published, Scientific American 299, Volume 3, 96-99, September 2008. Can Phishing Be Foiled? By Lori Faith Craner. Over just a few weeks, I received email messages from several banks warning me that my online banking services were in danger of being deactivated. From eBay telling me that I needed to change my password, from Apple complaining that I had unpaid bills for music downloads, from an airline offering me the opportunity to earn a quick $50 for filling out a survey, and from the Red Cross asking me to contribute money to help earthquake victims in China. These messages were all very convincing and looked authentic. Except for the eBay message, however, they were all fraudulent emails known as phish. Phish emails are constructed by con artists to look like legitimate communications, often from familiar and reputable companies, and usually ask victims to take urgent action to avoid a consequence or receive a reward. The desired response typically involves logging into a website or calling a phone number to provide personal information. Sometimes victims need only click on links or open email attachments for their computers to become infected by malicious software, known as malware, that allows phishers to retrieve the data they want or take control of the victim's computer to launch future attacks. Although the details of phishing scams can vary, the result is usually the same. Thousands of unsuspecting victims give information to criminals who then use it to break into their accounts and steal their money, or identities, or both. The Anti-Phishing Working Group, an international consortium of organizations committed to wiping out Internet scams and fraud, keeps track of phishing activity, including the number of unique phishing websites detected every month. In 2007, monthly totals ranged as high as 55,643. During each month in 2007, anywhere from 92 to 178 different company brands were phished, meaning their names or logos were used to fool victims into thinking they were dealing with a trusted institution. According to research and consulting firm Gartner, an estimated 3.6 million Americans fell victim to phishing last year, leading to losses of more than $3.2 billion. With so much at stake, the computer security community has been scrambling to develop technologies to combat phishing, such as filters for email and web browsers that flag phishing attempts. Although such software has helped stop many attacks, phishers are constantly evolving their tactics to try to stay a step ahead of such technologies. Since phishing plays on human vulnerabilities, a successful attack requires a victim to succumb to the lure and take some action. It is also not strictly a technological problem. For that reason, my research group at Carnegie Mellon University is studying the best ways to teach people to recognize and avoid phishing scams. This research, in turn, is informing our design of anti-phishing software so people are more likely to use it correctly. Because human factors are a critical element in the success of phishing attacks, we have found that they can be essential weapons to foil phishers as well. Teachable moments. When we began trying to understand why people fall for phishing attacks in 2004, my coworkers Mandy Holbrook and Julie Downs recruited people on the streets of Pittsburgh to interview. Most were unaware of phishing and assumed the term had something to do with the banned fish. Others knew about email scams that used the names of financial institutions, but they did not realize that messages seemingly from retailers might also be fraudulent. Most people had little sense of how to identify a phishing email and tended to rely on superficial features such as a logo or a professional look to determine whether it was legitimate. They also did not understand the security messages displayed by their web browsers and did not know how to use cues in web addresses and within email messages to judge their authenticity. After confirming that a great need exists to educate Internet users about phishing, our next step was to review existing anti-phishing training efforts to try to understand why they apparently do not work. We found a wide range of websites devoted to anti-phishing training provided by companies, government agencies, and industry associations. Some of these included a lot of technical jargon and more information than a non-technical computer user was likely to digest. A few sites provided good background to raise awareness of the phishing threat, but little in the way of actionable advice about how people could protect themselves. In fact, we found in a laboratory study that some of the best anti-phishing materials in terms of raising awareness left people overly suspicious of legitimate websites. Worse still, messages that companies send to their employees or customers to warn them about phishing attacks are largely ignored. We did learn, however, that it was much easier to get research volunteers to read email that looks like a phishing message than to get them to read a security-related email. Our studies seem to show, therefore, that awareness of phishing in the abstract does not translate into protection, but that first-hand experience with phishing could provide a powerful teachable moment. With some of these insights in mind, members of my team, Panarangam Kamaraguru, Alessandro Acquisti, and others, developed a training system called Phish Guru, which delivers anti-phishing information after users have fallen for simulated phishing messages. The program incorporates a set of succinct and actionable messages about phishing into short cartoons, wherein a character named Phish Guru teaches would-be victims how to protect themselves. In a series of studies, we demonstrated that when people read the cartoons after falling for the simulated phishing emails that we sent to them, they were much less likely to fall for subsequent attacks. Even a week later, our test subjects retained what they had learned. In contrast, those who read the Phish Guru cartoons sent to them by email, without experiencing a simulated attack, were very likely to fall for subsequent attacks. Extending this principle, Steve Sheng, one of my graduate students, also developed an online training game called Anti-Phishing Phil that teaches people how to identify suspicious website addresses while providing an experience of getting caught by a phisher. Players take on the role of Phil, a young fish that must examine the web addresses associated with the worms he encounters and determine which are safe to eat. When Phil tries to bite a worm with a fraudulent address, he gets caught on a fishing hook and hauled out of the water. An older and wiser fish then appears on the scene and explains where Phil went wrong. Through both laboratory and field studies, we have shown that the game makes a significant difference in users' ability to identify phishing sites. Comparing their performance before and after the training, we saw a drop in the number of false negatives, phishing sites mistakenly deemed to be legitimate, and false positives, legitimate sites judged to be phishing sites. The game players also outperformed participants who trained with a tutorial or with materials from other sources. Although we have shown that we can teach people to protect themselves from phishers, even those educated users must remain vigilant and may require periodic retraining to keep up with phishers' evolving tactics. The Anti-Phishing Working Group reported that the number of programs and websites devoted to infecting computers with password-stealing code jumped dramatically this year, for instance. Spear phishing attacks, which are tailored to their victims, are another growing trend. These can take the form of emails sent to the employees of a company that appear to have come from a manager in that company, leading the employees to trust the message and open its attachment. Information available on corporate websites and through social networking sites can help attackers to craft these targeted messages. Because phishers are such determined criminals, individual computer users cannot be expected to defend themselves alone. Our group also develops automatic filters that can identify likely phishing attacks. But in this work, too, we have found that human responses can be critical to a filter's success. A multi-pronged defense. Many browser programs already include built-in security filters, or can work with add-on programs for detecting suspicious websites. Yet even when anti-phishing software tools are able to correctly identify phishing websites, they may still be ineffective if users choose to ignore their warnings. To understand why some people do not heed such security messages, another of my graduate students, Serge Egelman, sent simulated phishing emails to the volunteers participating in our research. When the recipients fell for the phishing messages and clicked on the links, warnings were triggered in their web browsers. Egelman then found that all the participants who used the Mozilla Firefox 2 browser heeded the warnings, whereas those who used Internet Explorer 7, i.e. 7, often ignored them. We determined that the dramatic difference in the responses of the two groups was largely attributable to the fact that the IE 7 users either did not notice the warning messages or confused them with less severe warnings. Microsoft appears to have learned this lesson too, and the next generation of the Internet Explorer browser, IE 8, now has clearer warning messages that are similar to those shown by Firefox. In addition to clarity, we have found that accuracy is another critical factor affecting whether users respect the warnings of automatic filters. A high rate of false positives can undermine a filter's credibility and cause users to ignore it after a while. The anti-phishing filters we tested employ a mixture of approaches to identify phishing messages and websites. Most commercially available tools use a blacklist of known phishing sites, for example. As new sites are reported, they are quickly added to the lists. Some tools also use a white list of known legitimate sites. Most filters do not rely solely on such lists, however. Some analyze each website a user visits and apply a combination of heuristics to determine whether the site is likely to be fraudulent. A few of these are the same kinds of signals we train people to look out for, such as web addresses, beginning with all numbers or addresses that look similar to those of well-known brands. Other features the filters scrutinize include things people could not readily see. For example, the tool may take into account the age of the website because phishing sites are typically extremely short-lived, remaining active for as little as a few hours to days or weeks. The time element can make a difference in the performance of the filters that rely heavily on blacklists. Our group recently tested 8 consumer anti-phishing programs, for instance, by feeding them fresh phishing URLs. We discovered that most of the blacklist programs caught fewer than 20% of the phishing sites when we tested them within minutes of receiving the URLs. After 5 hours, most could detect about 60% of the active phishing sites. The programs that used a combination of blacklists and heuristics fared much better, with one detecting almost 90% of phishing attacks from the beginning of our test. Our group has been working on programs that employ machine learning techniques to detect phishing email. This is a common approach used to detect spam emails. But spam detectors are not very accurate when it comes to phishing messages, which generally look legitimate. A member of our team, Norman Sade, has been leading an effort to develop a tool, which we originally called Pilfer, that analyzes emails for a variety of features that may be indicative of phishing. For example, phishing emails often contain hyperlinked text that looks like the address of a well-known website, but the actual embedded computer code directs users to the attacker's site. In addition, the web addresses in phishing emails often contain 5 or more dots and point to recently registered domain names. Not all phishing emails contain these features, however, and sometimes legitimate emails contain them as well. Researchers therefore trained a program, which we have renamed Phish Patrol, by providing it with a large collection of legitimate and phishing emails so it can analyze these messages and learn which combinations of features are most likely to appear in phishing emails. In our most recent experiments, Phish Patrol was able to detect more than 95% of phishing messages, while only triggering false positives for around 0.1% of legitimate messages. We have also combined some of the features used in Phish Patrol with other approaches to detect phishing websites. Jason Hong has been leading our group's development of a tool called Cantina, which analyzes the content of a web page in combination with other heuristics to determine whether or not the page is part of a phishing site. Cantina first employs a well-known information retrieval algorithm to identify 5 terms that are important on a given web page, but relatively uncommon on the Internet overall. For example, on an eBay login page, this lexical signature might be eBay user sign help forgot. If you were to search for these 5 terms using Google, the legitimate eBay login page would appear among the top search results. Phishing websites that have replicated the eBay login page are unlikely to appear because one of the criteria Google's proprietary algorithm uses in ranking a web page is the number of links to it from other pages on the Internet. So legitimate pages are more likely to be in the top results. This approach is not foolproof, however, especially if a legitimate site was recently created. Thus, it is only one of several features that Cantina considers in assessing a website. The evolving threat. We in the computer security community are not the only ones continually seeking to improve our performance. As anti-phishing technologies get better, attackers adapt their tactics. Phishing messages are now being sent via instant messenger and mobile phone text messaging. Phishers are using online games such as World of Warcraft and messaging features of social networking sites, such as Facebook, to lure their victims. Another type of phishing attack involves setting up Wi-Fi access points in public places and spoofing, imitating, the login pages of legitimate Wi-Fi vendors. These attacks are used to steal victims' passwords as well as to infect their computers with malware. Organized gangs of phishers leverage thousands of compromised computers as launch points for their attacks. For instance, a group believed to be based in Eastern Europe and known as the Rockfish Gang uses compromised computers to relay messages to phishing sites. It can thus send phishing messages that appear to originate from those computers, masking the web address of the actual phishing site and making it difficult for law enforcement to find the real source of the attack. Another evasive tactic this gang uses is a system that security experts have dubbed fast flux, in which the phishers manipulate Internet domain name servers to continuously change the numerical addresses corresponding with phishing domain names. Phishing is only lucrative, of course, if phishers have a way of converting stolen credit card numbers and other credentials into cash. Thus, phishers often recruit mules by advertising for people to fill work-from-home jobs or by befriending Internet users and convincing them that the phishers need their help. Mules are often unsuspecting victims themselves, who may believe they have been employed to perform a legitimate job. Yet a mule's real job is to transfer stolen money, and to be the person who gets caught if law enforcement catches on. By constantly improving phishing detection software and educating users about new types of phishing attacks as they are discovered, the number of phishing victims can be reduced. Coordinating international law enforcement efforts and finding ways to make phishing less lucrative will also help. Still, phishing remains an arms race that will be hard to eliminate completely without stopping it at the source, so consumers need every form of protection they can get. Avoid falling for phish. Never click on a link in a suspicious email or instant message, particularly one asking for personal information. If you do business with the purported sender, open your browser and type the company's usual web address yourself. Look carefully at web addresses for subtle errors, such as Amazon.com. Learn to parse web addresses for other clues to the site's legitimacy. If unsure of a website, perform a Google search for the company. The address of the suspicious site is unlikely to appear in the top results, whereas the real company website will. See consumer tips and resources from the Anti-Phishing Working Group at http://apwg.org/resources/overview. Play Anti-Phishing Phil at http://cups.cs.cmu.edu/anti-phishing_Phil. Originally published, Scientific American 299, Volume 6, 104 to 110, December 2008. Beyond Fingerprinting by Anil K. Jain and Sharath Pankanti. If you're like many people, navigating the complexities of everyday life depends on an array of cards and passwords that confirm your identity. But lose a card, and your ATM will refuse to give you money. Forget a password, and your own computer may balk at your command. Allow your cards or passwords to fall into the wrong hands, and what were intended to be security measures can become the tools of fraud or identity theft. Biometrics, the automated recognition of people via distinctive anatomical and behavioral traits, has the potential to overcome many of these problems. Compared with a physical token such as a bank card or with the knowledge of a secret such as a PIN, biometric traits are profoundly more difficult to forge, copy, share, misplace, or guess. Indeed, they offer the only way of determining whether a person has been issued multiple official documents, such as a driver's license or passport under different names. Yet they are quite easy to use as proof of identity. For these reasons, biometric systems have been gaining popularity in recent years. Laptops and mobile phones that can recognize a fingerprint, for instance, are now commercially available. In some countries, biometric security is employed to safeguard items such as ATM cards and passports to determine whether a person can rightfully enter a building or to ensure that someone is entitled to welfare payments. These systems are far from perfect, but with inexpensive sensors and powerful microprocessors now available, biometric technology is certain to become more pervasive. Measures of man. Biometrics is not a new idea. In 1879, Alphonse Bertillon, a French police inspector, proposed a complicated system of body measurements, arm and foot length among them, to identify repeat offenders. Over the next decade, British scholars established that each print of a finger exhibits a unique pattern that persists over time, setting the stage for the development of the fingerprint classification system in 1896. Shortly thereafter, Scotland Yard began collecting fingerprints left at crime scenes to pinpoint criminals. And today, almost every law enforcement organization in the world relies on fingerprints to identify wrongdoers, solve crimes, and conduct background checks on people applying for sensitive jobs. But fingerprints are not the metric of choice for every purpose. Several other physical and behavioral features have also been incorporated, singly or in tandem, into ID systems. The current emphasis in biometrics is to design fully automatic systems that are extremely fast, accurate, user-friendly, and cost-effective, and that can be embedded in existing security infrastructures. In addition to fingerprinting, workers in the past 30 years have developed ID systems based on such characteristics as the face, hand, voice, and iris, the colored part of the eye. Biometric systems require traits with two basic features. They must be unique for each person, and they must not change significantly with time. Some traits promote relatively high accuracy, others greater practicality or relatively low cost. The choice of trait to favor as an identifier, therefore, depends on the goals of the ID system. No single measurement is optimal for all applications. Consider the three most popular traits in use today: the fingerprint, the face, and the iris. In addition to its use in forensics, fingerprint recognition forms the basis of automated border control systems in a number of countries. In the U.S. alone, the Department of Homeland Security's U.S. Visit program has processed more than 75 million visitors since its debut in 2004. From a commercial standpoint, one of the biggest advantages of using fingerprints is that the sensors for capturing prints are now extremely cheap, around $5, and small enough to be embedded in consumer products, such as laptops, mobile phones, and even flash memory sticks. But these compact sensors have higher error rates than their larger, more expensive counterparts common in law enforcement, because they scan a smaller portion of the finger and the image they record is lower in resolution. Face recognition is gaining popularity as a security feature for computers and mobile phones, partly because it can take advantage of the built-in cameras that are becoming ubiquitous components of these devices. ID systems based on face recognition are quite accurate when the images are captured under controlled conditions, with the subject facing forward in indoor lighting and bearing a neutral expression, for example. They falter, however, when the original image and the newer one differ because of changes in pose, lighting, expression, age, and facial accessories such as glasses or a beard. This sensitivity to routine variations is particularly problematic for video surveillance, in which subjects do not present themselves in front of the camera in predetermined poses. Perhaps within 10 years, the technology will have advanced sufficiently to permit fully automated, real-time face matching and video surveillance. As for the iris, whose complex textured pattern is thought to be unique to each person as well as permanent, recognition is extremely accurate and swift. The subject simply looks into a scanner for a few seconds. The captured pattern is then analyzed and recorded. Matching is done by comparing a person's bit sequence to the sequences in a database. The speed and accuracy of this approach have driven the recent development of large-scale ID systems based on the iris, including the Iris Recognition Immigration System, IRIS, in the UK. Travelers enrolled in the system's database can sidestep the usual immigration channels at the airport, thereby cutting down on travel wait time. Iris recognition has its downsides, however. The method depends, for instance, on the use of algorithms that represent the random patterns in the iris as a sequence of bits. No known human experts can determine whether or not two iris images match. Hence, iris data are unsuitable for use as evidence in a court of law. Imperfect matches. Developers of biometric systems face other difficulties as well. Unlike ID systems requiring a password or a physical token, biometric systems generally have to make decisions on the basis of imperfect matches. Any system of comparison can lead to two basic types of error. In a false accept error, the system incorrectly declares a successful match between the input pattern and a pattern in the database that does not really match it. In a false reject error, the system incorrectly pronounces a failed match between the input pattern and a genuine match in the database. Experts generally agree that neither the false accept rate nor the false reject rate of a biometric authentication system should exceed 0.1%. That is, one mistake in 1,000 assertions of a match and one mistake in 1,000 assertions of a non-match. But in evaluations conducted by the National Institute of Standards and Technology between 2003 and 2006, error rates for systems based on the fingerprint, face, iris, and voice, another commonly used biometric trait, all exceeded the 0.1% level. Increasing the threshold score for a match can lower the false accept rates, but at the expense of increasing the false rejects. Reducing both error rates simultaneously will require developing biometric sensors that generate higher quality images and refining the feature extractors and matchers. Designers will also need to ensure that the systems are protected against sabotage. Ideally, it should be impossible for biometric data to be intercepted and re-entered into the systems. And it should be impossible to tamper with the biometric hardware or software. But these kinds of attacks are common to all authentication systems, including the password and token-based varieties, and so they can be countered with established tools of the trade. For example, cryptography can hinder hackers from intercepting, replaying, or altering information. Much more challenging is designing a secure biometric system that accepts only the legitimate presentation of traits by their owners without being fooled by doctored or spoofed traits. A plastic copy of a person's finger, for instance. To that end, sensors that detect heat and other signs of life can help guarantee that the input to be compared does not originate from an inanimate object. But perhaps the most effective strategy for improving the accuracy, reliability, and security of biometrics is to detect multiple biometric traits, or multiple instances of a trait, more than one fingerprint, for example. Reinforcing the identity of a subject through such combinations offers increasingly irrefutable proof that the biometric data are being presented by their legitimate owner and not an imposter. In fact, many passport systems are already evolving in this way. The E.L.V.I S program, which used to scan only 2 fingers of non-U.S. citizens, has started capturing all 10 fingers, and the system has the potential to assess both fingerprints and faces in the future. The privacy conundrum. The use of biometrics raises important privacy concerns. Who owns the data, the individual or the service providers? Will those data be used for an unintended purpose, to deduce something about a person's health, for instance? Biometric systems of the future will probably operate unobtrusively, capturing biometric traits without the active involvement of the user. Such stealth further confounds the privacy issue. At present, we see no concrete viable solutions on the horizon for addressing the entire spectrum of privacy concerns. We believe these problems can be resolved through public discussion and policymaking, however. They will have to be. It is only a matter of time before continued improvements to biometric tools will move them center stage in efforts to combat the rampant problems of security and identity fraud that our society faces. Originally published, Scientific American 299, Volume 3, 78-81, September 2008. This concludes the reading of Cyber Hacking, Wars in Virtual Space, from the editors of Scientific American, copyright 2017 by Scientific American, a division of Nature America, Incorporated. Scientific American is a registered trademark of Nature America, Incorporated. This book was read by George Newbern. This unabridged recording was published by arrangement with Springer Nature America, Incorporated, and was produced in 2020 by Blackstone Publishing, which holds the copyright. Neither this recording nor any portion of it may be reproduced or used for any purpose without prior written authorization from Blackstone Publishing. If you would like to obtain a monthly update telling you about new releases, call 1-800-SAY-BOOK. That's 1-800-729-2665. For a complete listing of our titles, visit our website at www.downpour.com. Thank you.